In this video, we're finally talking about a Super NES book. Now we're reading with power. Super power! Hi everyone, John here. I've previously reviewed a few video game related books on this channel, yet for some reason I haven't talked about any featuring my favorite video game console of all time, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, also known as the Super NES, or SNES, or SNES. I've talked about books featuring the NES and the Nintendo 64, which makes this omission even more strange. So let's remedy that right now. We have here the Unofficial SNES Super Famicom, a Visual Compendium by Bitmap Books from the UK. It's the fifth and currently the latest book in their series of visual compendiums that cover classic game platforms, as they have previously had books on the game libraries of the Commodore 64, the Commodore Amiga, the Sinclair ZX Spectrum, and as previously reviewed on this channel, the Nintendo Entertainment System. I loved that book, as you can see by my review of it here, and I'm sure many of you did too, so thankfully they followed up with this. Over 500 pages of 16-bit Nintendo nostalgia. This is the hardcover version, but both the soft and hardcovers come with a slipcase with a lenticular fascia. The format is the same as the previous books in the series. The main content consists of quick looks at many of the games, listed in chronological order, or at least by their year of release, with a 2-page spread for a screenshot and usually 2 to 4 short paragraphs about it. Some popular games get more than just one spread, like Super Metroid or Mario Paint, and then some other iconic games, like Street Fighter 2 or Super Mario World, get gatefold pages, which open up to feature a larger screenshot or a map. Hey, there's the first map I ever made for my site, vgmaps.com, there for the look at The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past. As before, the book doesn't cover every game ever released, but rather a healthy selection of its well-known games, and as implied by the title, it includes games from any region of the world, whether they are for the North American or European SNES, or for the Japanese Super Famicom. Both the English and the anglicized Japanese names are included for the games that might be named differently depending on the region. Aside from these mini-reviews, there are in-depth interviews with some industry insiders, including Julian Egebrecht, recounting how the studio known as Factor 5 came to be, Brian Fedreau, who worked on the Western-developed Square epic Secret of Evermore, and Sam Didier, art director for Blizzard Entertainment, among others. Speaking of art, the box art at the time was usually quite vibrant and dynamic, as seen in the box art section, which showcases the fronts of the boxes of 12 Super NES games and 15 of the typically vertically oriented Super Famicom games. And also on the topic of art, there are some great pixel art intro pages made specifically for this book, and glamorous hardware photography throughout. The company profiles in this book include the two RPG powerhouses, Square and Enix, back when they were separate, as well as Argonaut Software, developers of the Super FX chip, as well as Hudson Soft and Acclaim. No mention of Capcom and Konami here, probably because they were already mentioned in a previous book for the NES. Also included here are some interesting articles, one at the beginning of the book talking about the 16-bit revolution, one about the SNES packaging, and one about the power of Mode 7. You know, that scaling and rotating ability that the Super NES was known for. There are also collections of memories about the Super NES itself, and also memories from those who worked on the magazines that thrived in that pre-internet era, such as Nintendo Power, EGM, and Superplay. Once again, there is a quick look at some homebrew games, and the book ends with a look at, or at least a description of, 7 unreleased games, including Star Fox 2, though they do acknowledge its eventual release on the then upcoming Super NES Classic Edition, which was not yet available at the time that was written. So that's the Unofficial SNES Super Famicom, a Visual Compendium. Now that you know what this is all about, let's dig into my thoughts about it. Let's start with my critical observations, as I do often manage to find something to pick at. I don't know if it's just me, but I do feel the book has the same concern as I had with the NES book, of not being an entirely timeless retrospective. By that I mean there are clues that place the publication of this book obviously within the past year, with comments like how the previously unreleased Star Fox 2 will be on the upcoming Super NES Classic Edition, which is already available. If I was curious about a past game console and read a book about it, I wouldn't want to be distracted by these hints of when the book itself was written. I just want an archive of that time period to only be about that time period. Perhaps I'm really missing the point, but it's just not how I would have written or edited this if it were up to me. Unlike the NES book, there is no fan art section. Now I had criticized that section in the Visual Compendium for the NES, when I pointed out that some of the included works of art featured designs of characters that had been updated after the NES era, and therefore seemed to not actually fit the NES book. No such issue for this SNES book, as for whatever reason, any fan art section is entirely absent, which is kind of a shame, as I actually can and do appreciate fan art, as long as I'm not distracted by anachronisms, of course. Speaking of anachronisms, I did find it odd that the story about how famed game composer Yoko Shimomura came out with Blanca's theme song was the anecdote that goes along with Super Street Fighter II: The New Challengers. While Blanca's song is absolutely present in Super Street Fighter II, it seemed the story better fitting the original Street Fighter II where the song actually debuted. For the pages featuring the Super iteration of this game, there probably should have been a story specifically about that version. The funny thing is, I really liked that particular story, I just didn't think it should have been there. I guess I'm just making Death Mountains out of Monty Molehills, so let's move on to the better parts. The Super NES was of the 16-bit era, and therefore among the last of the primarily 2D consoles, so you can expect that the screenshots look incredible if you are a fan of pixel art. There are large and colorful sprites, which are clearly bigger and more vivid than those on the NES, but also not expected to be in 3D yet, at least not primarily, and early 3D hasn't aged quite as well. This is of course regarding the Super NES hardware itself, but results in this book being an incredible tome of some of the best raster graphics seen in video games, not only at the time, but of all time. VGMaps.com is once again credited for the use of some maps. Thanks! Shameless plug. But really, who doesn't love the light world, right? I was also able to get this review up sooner than it took for past reviews because I was reading the digital version which came out earlier, and for Kickstarter backers, so I was able to read it all before the physical copy arrived. The PDF has interactive features, including close-ups of the images in the articles, plus for the looks at each of the games, being able to see the box art, and even more impressively, some video footage of each game in action. 30 seconds of each game is usually plenty to give you an idea of what each game is like. It certainly explains why the file is over 3 gigabytes, but I guess these days, even that size wouldn't be that much of a burden for whatever device you view it on. Now that I have the physical copy, I do like the lenticular fascia on the 3mm thick protective board slipcase cover, the 4 bookmark ribbons in the colors of the Super Famicom's face buttons, and the book is a comfortable size and weight and makes for a great coffee table book. The pages feel nice, and the binding is thread sewn so the pages can lie flat. It's just a well-made book. So, do I like this book? You bet I do. I'm still looking for a book that covers every Super NES game ever made, like how these 2 other books I've reviewed thoroughly cover the NES and the N64, but like other visual compendiums by Bitmap Books, not attempting to catalog everything, but having a selection of the iconic games that well represent the platform's library is still quite satisfactory in that regard. There weren't many games, if any, that I felt were woefully absent. Despite nitpicking a few things, it's hard to argue with the book's quality, and the care that went into it, with all the carefully selected screenshots, quotes, and videos for the digital version. And even the shipping, wow! This was sealed in plastic wrap, with hard plastic corner guards, wrapped in thin foam, in a perfectly sized cardboard box with these fancy opening tabs, and then put in bubble wrap, and then in another bag. Bitmap Books didn't spare any expense in making sure that this book, which appeals to collectors, arrives in mint condition. But I would say that it could probably also appeal to anyone interested in the 16-bit era, whether for nostalgia or to discover the SNES for the first time. So I would give the Unofficial SNES Super Famicom a Visual Compendium from Bitmap Books a hearty recommendation to just about any gamer. And for a score, I would give this a 4.5 out of 5. And now, here's a bonus bit, just because. As I mentioned, I backed this and a few other books on Kickstarter, and backing projects almost always comes with some exclusive goodies. But this time around, just for fun, I might as well actually show off some of the swag. I love this Islands of SNES poster, showing this pixel art of 16-bit worlds, representing different genres. Though not using any actual Super NES art, gamers can easily recognize the influences behind each of these islands. There's also a blueprint poster, very cool. I chose the Super NES one, though a Super Famicom one was available, of course. There are also photos of the Super NES hardware, which are kind of neat too, and they come in this folder, which makes it all the more slick. And here's a filters thing you can use on the book to give the impression of scan lines, so you can appreciate the graphics in even more retro style. So there you go. That was my review for the Unofficial SNES Super Famicom, a Visual Compendium. You can pick up this book and other classic gaming tomes at bitmapbooks.co.uk. If you want to see other book reviews, please subscribe to this channel and don't forget to like and share. Until next time, see ya!